All right. Minority Leader Kevin McCarthy earlier today talking about what we would see later tonight. National security analyst for Newsmax, Ric Grenell, joins us now to share his thoughts on what we saw. It seems like the weather's very nice where you are, Rick, out west where the sun's still out. How much of this did you get to see, and what are your thoughts tonight?
Well, thanks for having me, Rob. I'm here in Douglas County, Nevada, where I'm campaigning for Adam Laxalt in the Senate race that the primary is on Tuesday. And I have to say, we've been traveling the state. We've been talking to all sorts of groups nonstop for the last week. No one is talking about the January 6th committee, literally no one. I watched a little bit of it, and, you know, I was struck with one thing about Liz Cheney. She's sitting on the dais there with a whole group of people who literally wanted to charge her father with war crimes. It was stopped, that whole farce of accusations back then, by Republicans. Mm-hmm. I don't know what happened to Liz Cheney. She's now a creature of Washington, D.C. She's certainly not Wyoming. And yet here she is defending the bureaucracy. What I heard from her constantly was really a defense of Washington, D.C. It was a show trial that a third world country would put into every home like propaganda. Yeah. And it was scary to watch it happen with two Republicans sitting there. I think it's shameful that we didn't have the other side, that we didn't see the other parts of the video. It was really a show trial. It really was. You said exactly right. This is exactly what you would see in a single party state where there was some kind of defiance against them. They would put them all up and they would say this is why they're wrong and this is why they're terrible, and only we can talk about it. There's no defense, and this is why it's the truth. Cut the cord. That's the end of the show. Watching what we saw tonight and talking about Liz Cheney, talking about the way government works, we were all sitting here thinking the same thing about Liz Cheney. What happened to Liz Cheney? What happens to these people? The only thing that I can possibly think is that, you know, the government worked a lot different before Donald Trump came along. I think we all can understand that. I mean, there wasn't that big of a divide between Republican and Democrat. They went out to dinner together. They were all kind of the big winners of a big, powerful government in the swamp that they now call it. Their clever word, the swamp. And I do think this is just a valiant attempt to save the swamp. I think that Liz Cheney thinks, I've got more in common with Democrats than I do with an outsider. I mean, the last thing we want to do is ruin the way things work in this town. I mean, I think they hate that idea. I think that's exactly right, Rob. We're fighting the insider versus outsider. I don't think we have a fight against Republicans and Democrats anymore. I think it's Washington, D.C. and the rest of the country. And what works in Washington, D.C. doesn't work in the rest of the country. Their rules are weird. I can tell you as somebody who has been in Washington, D.C., that the system takes care of itself. They literally want a bigger, better, badder Washington, D.C. The budgets are getting bigger. The infrastructure is getting bigger. The agencies are getting bigger. And I can't say that we're getting better service for the American people. We're just getting bigger and more. And we've got a whole bunch of reporters back in Washington, D.C. who love that system. Their social life is in Washington. Their church is in Washington. So they do not ever want to tear down Washington. And I looked at this whole thing and I thought, here's a show trial at night from a bunch of politicians who were worried about their safety and aren't thinking about gas prices or inflation or the American public safety. This was a total selfish move to say, we were scared, and so we want to take this January 6th event into the next year. I think it's shameful. And while we obviously condemn what happened on January 6th, the actions that were taken, the violence, especially against police officers, you do have to stop for a second if you want to be intelligent about this and think about why people are so angry. What makes them so angry? Why do they look at the Capitol building with disdain now? And it's probably because they have a government that hasn't worked for them in a very long time. Earlier tonight, Greg Kelly spoke with Joseph McBride, who's an attorney for several January 6th prisoners. Take a listen to what he had to say.
The real agenda is simple. This is the parading of political dissidents in the public square. This is the thing of dictatorships and not democracies. The January 6th committee is colluding with the Department of Justice to poison the jury pool, the grand jury pool, and to eviscerate any chance of a fair trial for anyone who is involved with January 6th.
I thought that was a very interesting perspective. Your thoughts?
Look, I agree with your first point, which was, we can condemn the vandalism and the riots. We should have been condemning all the vandalism and the riots coming out of the BLM riots across the country, but we didn't. Now we've got individuals who are still in prison uncharged a year later. Think about that. In America, sitting in a prison a year later because of some riot or vandalism charges. I was one of the first people out to say anyone who broke the law, anyone who committed vandalism or property damage, arrest them. Yep. Every single person that did that should be arrested and prosecuted appropriately. But to somehow craft this narrative that all of government was coming down, I think that that's crazy. I think that it's political, and it's shameful to have one party try to make that case to the American people in their homes on a nightly live hearing. Shameful.
Only 7 more to go. Ric Grenell, thank you so much for taking the time. We appreciate it.
Thanks, Rob.
All right.